Wondrous Cross.
Yeah, so our hymn today is When I Survey the Wondrous Cross.
When I...
Which I think probably most all of you know because of Chris Tomlin doing a cover of it a decade ago. Yeah.
You say that like I listen to Chris Tomlin or ever listen to Chris Tomlin.
But like every church sang it for like 3 years
It's better to
straight
say it.
every
I don't
Sunday.
know
It's better to-
what's Chris Tomlin, what's not.
I'm
because
sure
I
it was
never
played on
consciously
KSBJ for like 6
decided,
years straight.
I'll
Yeah.
listen to some Chris Tomlin.
That was my
But we're not going to do the Chris Tomlin version with the added chorus. We're just going to do the hymn.
I don't know.
But so was everything else. No. KSBJ was 3 songs for 3 years.
Yeah.
I
And then they added Toby Mac. And then it was 4 songs.
For 10 years.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Well, yes. Wow. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to His blood. See from His head, His hands, His feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all.
How does a Chris Tomlin version go?
That, but then added, oh, the wonderful cross.
Now I remember. That doesn't make any sense. I don't remember it.
Now it sounds like Chris
All
Tomlin.
who gather here, from thy grace draw near, bless your name.
Where did you get those lyrics, Steven? No, like, because they used the wrong 2 in the last slide.
Oh, they did?
Yeah,
I got
they
it
were
from,
missing an O.
my bad.
Was it the right tense?
No.
Right use of the-
Yeah.
I got them from guitarchords.com.
You should tell them.
There's something off.
Offering far too
You
small.
can try it. You can
Unless you're offering too
I
small,
wanna
but
get
even then small I
Is
feel
it
like should be
dry?
capitalized because it's either
No, it's just
place
weird. Take a
or-
taste.
And we're engaging idolatry, so.
Yeah, so
Who is this God named Small, and why are we offering to him?
exactly.
You're chilling me.
Right?
Let me see.
Isn't there just something weird about it?
Yeah.
Is that a reference to?
I don't think I've ever had key lime pie though, but
That's not it.
It is very
That's not
chunky.
Yeah, there's something weird about it.
it's almost like it's key lime pie.
It's like you taste the key
But if it
lime,
was a
and then you
pig.
taste something
It
else.
tastes like a pig. It's like a pig.
Oh yeah, we gotta go through and make sure we know.
Well, the Game Boy. Oh, it's like cheesecake but
Right,
melted
no,
in
it's
key lime
Jared.
pie.
Yeah,
Plus,
it's not right.
I did ask you to hand me one, and you handed me one.
4 verses to translate. When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died.
So when he looks
Means-
at that cross.
When I think about when Jesus died
all
on the
that
cross.
stuff.
Yeah, when I look at the cross, my richest gain I count but loss and pour contempt on all my
The
God.
filling tastes fine.
My richest gain,
Yeah.
I count but loss.
Tastes fine.
That's what that would mean.
There's cheese.
Earthly possessions mean nothing.
It is very
My
creamy.
richest gain, I count
Yeah.
a lot. I don't know. Well, is he talking
That's
about
an allusion to something Paul says, right?
sin? Oh,
All of my riches are as filthy rags.
Yeah.
To gain, or to live as Christ, to die as gain, that
Yeah.
sort of idea. So everything I have means nothing when I look at the cross. And when I look at the cross, I pour contempt on all my pride. What's that mean?
I get rid of my pride by saying it's wrong.
off and then cut your
Yes. I look at the cross, I despise the self-centeredness that I have, right? I pour contempt. I contempt my pride, my self-centeredness.
Contempt is not liking.
So when you see the self-sacrifice of Christ, it makes you despise your self-centeredness. That's the idea. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast save in the death of Christ my Lord. Oh my God. Anybody? Translation?
Don't let me boast.
Yeah, don't let me boast, except
About you.
In my salvation.
All glory to God.
specifically in
The death of
the death of Christ. Again, straight from Paul,
Christ.
right? I think it's Romans. If I boast in this. You with me? Does that ring bells for you?
Yes.
Okay. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood.
Giving up earthly things.
There you go.
The old self dying.
Yeah.
That's
See
talking
from
about
his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down.
This one specifically stood out to me. I think it's so he's talking about seeing him on the cross, or thinking about him on the cross, not seeing him.
Yeah.
Thinking about him on the cross and his head bleeding because of the crown of thorns, and also him crying is the sorrow, I think. And so
Well,
it's like the love. So such
the
love
three
is,
places that he's bleeding from, right? His head from the crown of thorns, his hands and his feet from the nails, hands and feet. So the blood is what he's referencing.
The blood of Christ.
well, the sorrow
Flowing
is the
mingled
love.
down.
Has-
So sorrow and love.
So the love is the blood, right? Or
Well,
the love,
the
sorrow, and the
and
love.
the love is the blood.
They're both
Right.
loaves.
They're both okay. I thought they were different.
You're on the right track.
Yeah.
Cool, cool,
Did ere such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown?
It hadn't been
Yes.
done before. this one's different.
cool. It seems like a question, but it's.
Yes.
I guess it's
Not
not.
so many words.
Yes?
So it's saying, have ever such love and sorrow be composed in one moment?
Maybe this will help.
I'm not sure about the thorns composing a rich crown.
Yeah, was that
It's actually a
supposed to be
question.
in it? Oh, it's okay. I was about to say. I was like,
It's like an exclamatory rhetorical question, but what's the rhetorical answer to the question?
No.
No. Yeah. That's,
I wasn't paying attention.
did
That's
so
all like joining.
Yes.
have we ever
Really
seen
hard.
such love and sorrow meet in such a way, or have thorns
No.
compose a crown this glorious?
No.
No. Yes. This is why the answer yes was like Okay.
Yes is typically just like my answer to things I don't understand, which is not good.
Oh, my yes was responding to Nathan's statement.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I said yes in
Yeah,
some
that's-
words.
I'm gonna be
That's what
honest. I agree
yeah,
with Leah
that's
because
what
I
I was
didn't get it.
But you understand it now, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Were the whole realm of nature mine that were an offering far too small?
If I had the whole world to give, it wouldn't be enough.
There you go. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all.
Your love requires all of me, not some.
Yeah. Ah, the old English way of putting the object before the subject.
Wow.
Do we not do that?
Not often.
Not often, yeah. If you'd like to read along with me. This hymn by Isaac Watts. If you remember last week, we mentioned Isaac Watts, and Denise was like, have we sung one by Isaac Watts yet? It was like, no, we should do an Isaac Watts hymn. Hence, we're doing an Isaac Watts hymn this week. This hymn by Isaac Watts, labeled by the well-known theologian Matthew Arnold as the greatest hymn in the English language, was written in 1707 for use at a communion service conducted by Watts. It first appeared in print that same year in Watts' outstanding collection, Hymns and Spiritual Songs. Isaac Watts was born on July 17, 1674, in Southampton, England. The eldest of 9 children, he was the son of an educated deacon in a dissenting congregational church. What does that mean? What's a dissenting congregational church?
It's not like revolting, but it's like
Becoming less and less congregate.
Unifying.
Yeah. So note the year, right? 1674. What is going on at this time in the church?
The Reformation.
Reformation, yeah. We're about 100, 130, 140 years solidly into the Reformation at this point. So the Church of England is splintering off into a whole bunch of different factions. The different veins of the Protestant Reformation are really gaining ground. The Baptists, the Anabaptists, the Calvinists, the Arminians, they're all doing their own little thing and making their own little cliques. And so he was a member of the Church of England, the Congregational Church in England, but this particular congregation was dissenting, as in they were breaking off from their denomination and lots of what they were doing. At the time of Isaac's birth, his father was in prison for his nonconformist beliefs. Young Watts showed an unusual aptitude for study and learned Latin at the age of 5, Greek at 9, French at 11, and Hebrew at 13. He began to write verses of good quality when he was very young. Waters. What?
that's a lot of languages.
Yeah, it's a lot of languages at a young age. Watts is frequently referred to as the father of English hymnody. One of his earliest concerns was the deplorable state to which congregational singing had degenerated in most English-speaking churches. The singing consisted of slow, ponderous psalms in which each line was first read by an appointed deacon and was followed by the droning of the congregation. The text of these psalm hymns were often crude and inelegant. Typical doggerel of the time is this: Ye ministers of the bubbling deep, your master's praises spout up from the sands, ye codlings peep and wag your tails about.
What?
Wow.
Talking about dogs?
Watts once wrote, the singing of God's praises is the part of worship most closely related to heaven, but its performance among us is the worst on earth. One Sunday, after returning from a typically poor service, Watts continued to rail against the congregational singing. I see so much of myself in Watts. His father
Just gotta learn
exclaimed,
Hebrew.
what?
Just gotta learn Hebrew.
Yeah. His father exclaimed, why don't you give us something better, young man? Before the evening service began, young Isaac Watts had written his first hymn, which was received with great enthusiasm by the people. The youthful poet decided to write other hymn settings. For a period of 2 years, Watts wrote a new hymn every Sunday. He went on to write new metrical versions of the Psalms with a desire to Christianize the Psalms with the New Testament and style. That's where I would start to depart from him, because I think that the Psalms do have a New Testament message and style already. Several of his hymns, he's operating in his context. So, Psalms here means something different than when we think of Psalms. Does that make sense? Like, what does Psalms mean here in the Congregational Church of England at the time?
Not the biblical book.
Yeah.
The typical doggerel of the time.
Yeah, the typical doggerel of the time. Good vocabulary. Doggerel just means lyrics.
Good to know.
Yeah, I didn't.
Oh.
Several of his hymns that were based on these new psalm settings are enduring favorites. Because of this bold departure from the traditional psalms, Isaac Watts was often considered to be a radical churchman in his day. Two of his more... These just sound like the words of a radical, right? Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast save in the death of Christ my Lord. Where did he get such an idea? Two of his more well-known, did I skip anything? Because of this bold departure, Watts was often considered a radical churchman of the day. Two of his more well-known hymns today are Am I a Soldier of the Cross and Joy to the World.
Yeah, radical.
Radical. The tune for this text is known as the Hamburg tune. It was the work of Lowell Mason, who was often called the father of American public schools and church music. Mason stated that he arranged this tune in 1824 from the ancient Gregorian chant, the earliest church music known. These church chants were inherited by the early Christians from the Hebrew temple and synagogue services. They represent some of the loveliest melodies known. Pope Gregory, who lived during the latter part of the 6th century, we studied him when we did church history way back when, was one of the first church leaders to be concerned about church music. He did much to improve and organize these chants, hence the term Gregorian chants, for Gregory, the Pope. These chants still form the basis of Roman Catholic music today. That's starting to change with some of the newer pop Christians like, who is it? Is it Redmond who's Catholic? Or
Matt Redman?
yeah.
Hey, you should
One of the
some
big
water bottles.
names. I
Is
think
he-
it's Matt something. I thought it was Matt Redmond. Is Catholic.
How many?
Yeah,
How
but
many?
Also,
Like how
if you
many?
eat a slice of the
Do
pie
you
that
know
doesn't
about how
taste
the
like
popes
cheese.
work? Like how many do you get
So, this one.
per
Yeah.
year?
How many
I'm going to bring this down.
popes do you
Okay.
get per year?
My bad. Well, I guess it'd be per
Do you wanna
5
taste it?
years. Like, does it? When does it change? Like, you know how the president, you only
It's rather
get get a
interesting.
There's no official like
Just
service limit on a pope. It's
Oh,
when-
you just
usually when he dies,
Oh, yeah.
or he retires very close to death.
It's weird, right?
It was very strange for Benedict to retire as early as he did. Usually they die as
When
pope.
do you retire?
Yeah.
He's still alive. I think he retired in his 60s.
Oh.
He wasn't pope for super long, and he was very popular among many Catholics. But yeah, usually
But this new guy's really popular, right?
it depends on who you ask.
Oh, he's not.
Among the Catholics who really like Pope Benedict, the previous pope, he is not popular at all.
No, I'll just take this one marshmallow.
No, excuse you,
I
sir.
think he's a terrible pope.
Okay.
Unless you're giving that one marshmallow to
The
yourself.
Very,
that's
very liberal
unacceptable.
Christians
This is my
and
Okay.
people who believe in the social
about to
gospel,
say.
the idea that Christianity is all about making the world right now a better place.
If you don't feel like
Very
you love
much
those
like
marshmallows,
Pope
just take them
Francis.
off and give them all to me.
But I would say since Christianity isn't primarily about making the world right here and now a better place, it's primarily about saving people in the afterlife. And the change that takes place right here and now as a result of that, I would disagree with a lot of what Pope Francis says.
Bro, I'm not feeling
Well, two of the top questions on here were during the eternity of the history of the Bible, or entirety, I think is entirety of the history of the Bible, what was going on the other side of the world. That's a big question. And some of that I can't answer.
We don't have to.
According to my view, Earth was created, I would guess, around 9,000 years ago. Close to young Earth creationists, but I do think there are gaps in the genealogy that aren't accounted for. But I don't think it's billions or millions or whatever the latest number is that gets thrown around. When I was your age, it was only in the millions. It's amazing how the Earth aged an extra
But carbon dating is
an
such a
extra 9
reliable
billion
way to
years
tell
in
how
only
things
3
are.
years.
I know.
Aren't we carbon dated?
They carbon date humans.
Yeah, so aren't we carbon dated?
We are carbon.
You know the funny
That
thing?
doesn't mean we're
Carbon
carbon dating?
dating is only accurate up to about the amount of time that the Bible suggests the world's been around.
Shorter than
Interesting,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Well, we just went over radioactive decay in physics, and it's funny because So we were doing it with dice to kind of like show how it works, and it was like it all has a random chance of happening. So stuff could decay far before it's supposed to, and could stay around far longer than it's technically supposed to.
Well, that makes so much sense.
So
She looked it up.
But it's the science is settled. This is how old the Earth is. Accept it.
I wish
Until we lengthen the amount of time that the Earth
What's
has been.
funny is scientists break their own rules about what counts as fact to prove evolution.
Can we just agree to disagree, or agree that we don't know?
What?
I'm down for that.
I'm totally down for that.
I
I
just
like
go with this is what the Bible says.
No offense.
And the evidence you've provided me that it's not how the Bible goes is not great evidence. So.
Being right is way more fun.
So anyway, what's going on? So the reason I brought that up at all was that's about how old I think the Earth is. So most of what you read in museums and other guesses about ancient history from that long ago is moderately well documented, at least down to about the age of the flood, and that's when you start to see really clear post flood era as far as Bible dating is when you start to see pretty clear records of things in the fossil record and in other nations' historical records.
But at the same time, everything was going on with Christianity. There was stuff going on near the area with Buddhism and stuff, right? And there were other religions coming up around the same, like other ideologies coming up around the same.
not Buddhism,
Well, not maybe, maybe not.
but Hinduism was there.
Hinduism is older than Christianity according to secular dating and things. There is evidence of Hindu-based civilizations that appears to be older than evidence of Jewish civilizations.
Okay.
The reason for that is that we know exactly when the Jewish civilization became a civilization, and it was before the Earth was. If you read the Bible, right, the Earth was created. A whole lot of time passed, and then the Jewish civilization became a civilization after the Exodus. You remember the story, right? Creation, then flood, then Tower of Babel, then Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob. Jacob's name changes to Israel. Israel's 12 sons go into Egyptian captivity for 400 years. They come out of Egyptian captivity, and they are a nation. They are the nation of Israel. So, Hinduism, as a system and a religion, was growing, I would say, from the time of the flood. Post-flood, post-Tower of Babel, is what I would say. Is when other nations began developing their own systems and cultures and religions and philosophies of thought. And so, yeah, what's going on in Asia, South Asia, is bubbling along by itself without any mention of anything like that in the Bible up until the exile. The exile, Babylonian exile. So pull up our timeline. So I like my timeline.
And I think it's also the same in North America, the same sort of thing. It's just bubbling along.
Yeah.
But it was all going on in the same area we always talk about,
All that history.
the Middle East, Africa-ish.
No. So this might just be a
The
question
world
of
was
simple
still-
geography.
So do you think they crossed the land?
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Now they're
Accident.
working, like,
Or do you
here,
think
and
there was
everything
actually a
else was flat.
Pangea
Okay,
and God
yeah. So I'm
separated
wondering
the lands?
We don't know a lot about the Native records because we kind
Uh,
of wiped them all out.
I honestly don't care. Could be either or.
Before when what? Or before when did we wipe? We didn't wipe out the Native Americans until way later, right? Wasn't it way later?
I would
But
guess.
we also didn't get their history. We didn't ask them questions.
That's true.
There's like Indians.
So they could have been around.
Since the Tower of Babel, they could have crossed. They could have either moved there and then God separated the lands of like Pangea or whatever, or they just crossed over from Russia to Alaska using the ice land bridge.
Right. So that's. There's some Christians who would say there's a verse in Genesis during the genealogies, Genesis 5. No, it's 7. Is it 7? Where's my Bible? There it is. No, I didn't. I was just blind for a second.
That's exactly what I thought of.
Now, what's the next? What is it?
If you
Yeah, it's
go,
revved up like a deuce, another motor in the night.
Yeah, rev.
What did you think it said?
At first,
Genesis
not
10.
that.
Oh.
Genesis 10, there's a verse when they're going through the genealogies of Noah. Noah gets off the ark. His nakedness is uncovered by his son Ham.
Mm-hmm.
He curses Ham and his descendants. He's listing all of the descendants. And then to Shem, his third son. He has all these kids, sons of Shem, Arpachshad, to Eber. Eber is Shem's great-grandson, I think. Verse 25, so 10:25 if you're reading along in Genesis. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Alamada Shapha. People will say that little phrase, for in his days the earth was divided, refers to Pangea breaking apart. And that God caused all of this to happen during the time of Peleg.
Was that not? Is that not?
I don't think that's...
Just oh shoot, that's a good question.
What
Do
if-
we believe
I'm-
in Pangea?
I think it's certainly possible that God created the earth, and the way that he did it was he created the land altogether and then broke it apart. I don't believe that it happened according to the timeline that scientists currently claim Pangea happened. I would say if Pangea was, I think it makes a whole lot of sense just looking at it. It looks like that fits, right? That section, where's my pointer?
But when he changed the tongues, right?
It looks like this fits there, and this fits in there. So, possible that Pangea, the breakup of Pangea, is a real thing. I would say probably it happened at the flood,
Okay.
when the earth broke
That
apart.
would probably be the most likely.
Broke apart its crust, and the waters of the deep gushed forth. And
That makes a lot of sense.
that's kind of what I think is that during the time of the flood, essentially God used the flood to push, for an inelegant way of saying it, all of this land that way. So,
Tectonic.
again, this is all my opinion on a lot of these questions.
So
They're
you
so
believe
clear.
in the land bridge?
I do think the land bridge,
What's the land
that during the
bridge?
flood, it was when Pangea broke up, and then the land bridge between Russia over to Alaska was
It's
how.
like 50 miles. It's not that.
That's ridiculous.
It may look like
See how
it's
close it
off-
is?
Oh, what? How is?
So, I think
does
that the
that
way
look
that the
at that?
people in North America got there was after the flood and after Babel, when God confused the languages and scattered the peoples across the face of the earth.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
sent them all
That makes
across
sense.
Russia to North America.
That makes sense. With the
Well,
languages.
it's part of the earth, so
And then the Chinese split off.
Hey, I wonder what was going on.
I'm also
Russia,
perfectly
so-
comfortable with the idea that God miraculously transplanted people at Babel.
What do you mean transplanted people?
Like, he just picked
Like
them up and
moved
dropped
them.
them somewhere else.
surprise.
Like
you're
those
on a new
little-
train.
All it says is,
God
again,
sits on your
here's
feet.
all it actually says. Chapter 11, verse 8. So the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. The word dispersed could be taken in a lot of different ways. And so if dispersed means that God's actually, like, the way we think of it, like magic teleported people, God can do that. So
I mean, it did
Did
say.
he?
It does
Sure.
say he
dispersed them, yeah.
instead
So-
of just saying they dispersed.
Exactly. So yeah, lots of these arguments just don't bother me because I believe that the miraculous can happen, and when there's room in the text for the miraculous to have happened, and specifically when God is acting, the miraculous is by definition happening. I don't have a big problem with explaining it via the miraculous. I think there are other ways you could explain it that better align with evidence that scientists put forward. The problem is you cannot accept the conclusion that the majority of scientists put forward together today as the truth. You have to view their evidence and see how they're arriving at their conclusion and see if their evidence actually lines up with their conclusion. Because the vast majority of quote-unquote scientific claims today are not actually scientific claims. They are
Historical claims.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. They're claims about things that science can't really answer. Science answers the questions how do things act, not how have things acted. Does that make sense? Science observes reality as it is and draws conclusions based on that reality. And science is a great thing. I love science. I'm a big fan of, particularly physics. It's one of my favorite sciences. But it does not answer about questions about how things have acted in the past, prior to science existing. So all of these questions about the history of the Earth can't be explained
Well, then
by
why
science.
would they
Why
try
hasn't
to
science
explain
always-
it?
Partly because of the Reformation, the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and the Modernist period that says that science is the answer to everything and the advance of technology will overcome all of Earth's woes. It's a philosophical reason of why we're in the state we're in today. But did that make sense, or did I just talk over? Okay.
That religion is hope for the masses.
Yeah.
And nothing more.
Opiate of the masses. Did that? So I do think that. So yeah, India is where Hinduism was cropping up and becoming a thing.
Mhm.
The Middle East is over here. So that's a big separation of desert in between the two.
Okay.
So they're plugging along after the Tower of Babel. Different civilizations are plugging along doing their own thing, particularly India, China, Aboriginal tribes, and the people crossing over the land bridge, I think, into North America and South America,
Or transplant.
or transplant. I think that's what's happening on the Earth. So they're doing their own. So the things that we can observe up to about 5,000 years ago, I have no reason to deny their evidence is fairly good. I would argue with some of the way they date things of how old it is, but
Australia looks like a bean.
Actually, if you split it in half, one side is a dog head, one side's a cat head.
Wow, it's almost as if you spent time on the internet.
One side looks like a dog head, and the other side looks like a rabbit head.
No, it's a cat head.
It looks more like a cat, a rabbit.
Yeah, but
It's
the ears
an
are
angry
way
cat.
too small.
other questions. Well,
What was the other one I asked?
how can I continuously live in the world without living for the world?
That one.
By grace through faith.
Can you look up the exact units of
Is that
the arc?
Trust in God. If I understand the question correctly.
yeah?
That's all you got.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
What was your question, Nick?
Can you look up the exact units of the arc?
Of
The
the
ark?
ark? Yeah.
Not
And
of
it's
the
not-
covenant, like Noah's
Do you
ark.
mean
Okay.
units or cubits?
Oh,
Yes.
interesting. Oh, call back to
Well,
earlier.
cubit
when she
is-
Let's
said-
see. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Gopher is actually a Hebrew word. Don't know what it means.
It's a type of wood.
Obviously, some type of wood.
Some type
that
of wood.
is natural to the area around him.
This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits. Its breadth 50 cubits. Its height 30 cubits. Make a room for the ark and finish it to a cubit above. Set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with a lower second and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all fleshes, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die.
Can you look up like a real life comparison?
My friend told me a while back that they found it somewhere, but
No,
I was like, no.
It's made of wood.
it's gone.
It died.
But gopher wood. We don't know what that was. No, I mean, like, it's kind of-
Immortal wood!
It's kind of a joke, but it's
We
like
have found
serious because we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
We don't know what type of wood
Because the
that was.
gophers, they all turn into gophers.
Because the world has changed so much since then, so there was materials and certain things that were there that aren't here anymore. I think.
I don't know about that one.
Well,
I mean, it was still the earth.
but
What are you
like,
looking for?
What?
what?
It's a Titanic.
I don't know.
Noah's
Ark
Ark.
is at the
Oh,
bottom.
I was like, what the heck?
So like that doesn't look like Noah's Ark.
So it's definitely not able to fit every single species of animal we have today.
Yeah,
well,
That's what I'm saying.
So,
back then there was
You
different-
believe in microevolution?
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think microevolution is scientifically proven.
yeah.
Which is
Because it doesn't answer
It is
what
observable, testable, and repeatable. The also, yeah, so bring up a good point. The way that the Bible describes it is 2 of each kind, 7 of those that are not clean. Is it 7 of those that are not clean? Or
so pigs. Like those?
take with you 7 pairs of clean animals and a single pair of all those that are not clean. So that's another thing for you to ponder. He's talking about clean and unclean animals during the time of the ark.
Ships.
when were the lists of clean and unclean animals given to the nation of Israel to abide by?
After
In the law.
Through Moses.
Yeah,
And Moses came after Noah.
that's the flood. That's the giving of the, or
So
that's the
obviously
giving.
there was
That's
some
the giving
sort
of the law.
correspondence between the people in, or at least Noah and God.
There's, yeah, almost as if what Moses is doing here with the law is based on what was happening back here, not the other way around. Kind of like how history works. Everything that Moses is doing in the law, and I'm particularly noticing this as I study Genesis really in depth, is in Genesis. It's stuff that happened in the story. The whole point of the Day of Atonement coming from right at the beginning when God makes an atonement for the people. Cain and Abel, why are they sacrificing animals? Well, because God told them to, we assume. There's something going on there, and so Israel is basing their system off of what God was doing in the story previously. Anyway, things that... But, answer your question, yes. The phrase, after its kind, what does that mean? Is that talking about species? Is that talking about subspecies? Is that talking about kingdom, phylum, order, class? You know what I'm talking about? King Philip with the...
kingdom.
Yeah. Which one is kind, after its kind? I don't know.
Flamingos.
What if they had chosen
Hey, was there flamingos?
other kinds of that kind?
Wait a second. Wait a
We'd
second.
have a completely different evolution source.
This is the part. This is the part
We'd
that's
have,
not
like,
gonna make any sense.
Yeah.
True sources.
So, does it say
everywhere.
in the Bible
It was
when-
suspense.
he told Noah to gather 2 of every species,
He,
right?
he didn't tell him to gather. He,
He
said
said
they'd
he'd
show
bring
up.
Oh, he said they show up. That's what he said?
Make sure.
Because I'm like, I don't think a flamingo could just...
Make a roof on it, keep it above. For behold, I will bring a flood water upon the earth and destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons' wives with you, and everything living of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark and keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. The birds according to their kind, the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded. And the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are a righteous man. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, a male and his mate. A pair of animals that are not clean, male and his mate. 7 pairs of the birds of heaven also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of the earth. For in 7 days I shall send rain, and Noah did all these things. Noah was 600. When all the animals went into the ark with him, of clean animals, animals of not clean, the birds of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, into the ark with Noah, and God had commanded Noah, and after 7 days the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So it actually doesn't say, it just says, take with you these things.
Oh, shoot. And what about the water animals?
They didn't die because they were in the water.
So
During
it
the
said
flood.
everything died, Leah.
That's when it doesn't make sense.
Duh.
I mean, it has to make sense.
So
it
obviously,
does. But I'm saying...
a couple of pairs of the aquatic life
They just followed him.
from,
It was like a
Nobody ended up...
or they
On
put
land,
like a
right?
hole in the bottom of the ship, and they used pitch, and they blocked it off, and then the fish swam into the bottom of the boat, and they were safe because they were in the island.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the water animals
Hunchbacks
survived because they were water animals.
I don't know. That's stretching it.
I mean, hunchbacks...
I don't know. Well,
live
Nathan's
all
theory
the
does
time.
make a lot of sense.
Yeah, bro.
With sharks.
As long as the sharks kept
You had a question earlier before we got on this whole Noah thing.
Right. I had a friend ask me. He was like, so we were given a new covenant with the New Testament.
Yeah.
Then why? And
and the Israelites, they followed the laws that Moses gave us, the Ten Commandments. So then why is it that we still follow the law like in Leviticus that was given to us?
Because God's sacrifice didn't nullify the law.
We
The
don't
law's
follow the
still
laws of
there.
Leviticus.
What laws of Leviticus?
Like what was given to us in Leviticus? Like, do we still follow those as part of the new covenant?
That's a very good question, actually. It's a lot more complicated question than you even think. The question of what is the interplay of the old covenant and the new covenant? How does the new covenant interact with and what is the old covenant? So, in the Bible, we see at least 3-4 covenants made. One with Noah, one with you assume one with Adam. Not really, though. That'd be more covenant theology. One with Noah for sure. One with Abraham for sure. One with David for sure. The one with Moses for sure. Sorry?
What was Satan for sure?
Did he
Or
have?
Eve.
Oh.
Well, there's no the word covenant isn't used there, so that's why.
It wasn't like he cut a dove in half and walked.
Yeah, so that's why I said like Adam maybe, but put that one aside. But for sure, Noah, he specifically says, "I established this covenant with you." Moses, Abraham, David. There are covenants made. So which old covenant are we talking about when we talk about the old covenant? That's the first question that has to be answered, and how to talk about this stuff. Generally speaking, I think when we're talking about the old covenant, we're talking about Moses, the Levitical law that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like I just said, all of that is based on what's going on here, right? All of that is specifically for the nation of Israel so that they can better understand and relate to God. And when they get to here, he is fulfilling that covenant. So Jesus shows up on the scene, and beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, I did not come to abolish the law, but, anybody?
Perform
To fulfill the law.
To fulfill it. He comes in saying that I'm going to establish a new covenant with you, and that's a reference to something that is in the law, Jeremiah 31. This is why knowing the story is so important. You're asking a very good question. There's all of these different covenants, and which parts continue, which parts sort of die off, if you want to put it that way. Jeremiah talks about the new covenant that's going to be established right here. But Jesus comes saying he establishes a new covenant with his disciples. And we talk about a new covenant being established in the end times. So to answer the question I think you're asking those is which covenant what are we bound to follow?
Well, he had said that he was arguing with this friend on whether, like, specifically about whether it was mentioned in one of the old covenants about, gay marriage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he was saying, since it wasn't mentioned in the New Testament, why do we not believe in that?
And that's actually the basis of the argument. If something's not mentioned in the New Testament, do we need to follow it? Is actually a good one. There's a whole lot in the Old Testament that we don't need to follow because it's part of the Old Covenant, specifically for the nation of Israel and how they are to relate to God. Examples of this: do not wear clothing of two different fabrics when you enter the temple. When you sacrifice your animal on the altar, drench its blood on the corners of the altar. These are things we don't do, right? Why not? Answer: because we're not Israel. We are different from Israel. Homosexuality, though, while it is mentioned in Israel's law, it is also mentioned in the New Testament. So we would say, and this is something I say all the time, particularly on this issue, don't quote Leviticus when you're arguing against homosexuality, because then you have to have this whole conversation. And there's actually parts of Leviticus, I think, that are still binding for all believers as part of the assembly. And I think the section that homosexuality is mentioned is part of it. But that's a very nuanced, complex thing that you have to get into at that point. Talking about sections of Leviticus. You have to actually know the book of Leviticus. Most people who are talking about this don't know the book of Leviticus. So the Holiness Code, chapters 18 through 20, are, I think those parts are still valid for the New Testament church. But you don't even have to get into that. All you have to do is just turn to the New Testament passages. Say, yeah, sure, let's just ignore Leviticus for a second and say that that doesn't apply to the church at all. What about 1 Corinthians 6, Romans 1, and 1 Timothy? Homosexuality is all specifically mentioned as sinful in those three passages. That's not Old Testament. That's New Testament church. And keep the discussion there. And if you want to look at that, we definitely can.
So,
Real quick, like.
which,
This is all available on MyGillenThings.com.
did I just say Josh Tweet, PNG?
Yeah.
What was I about to ask? Oh, shoot. Okay, dispensationalism, is that, which one is the one where we were learning about how to be able to combat certain situations? I think that was it. Was that it? No. Be able to talk to people, be able to.
Apologetics?
Is that apologetics? Is that apologetics?
Being
Is
able
that
to
what it
defend
is? Defend your faith. That's what it is.
apologetics.
That's apologetics?
Yeah.
Okay, dispensationalism is something else.
Yeah. Dispensationalism is something different than apologetics.
Okay.
One is more confusing than the other.
These three passages for sure specifically mention homosexuality. Romans 1, 1 Corinthians 6, and 1 Timothy 1. This one I actually think lots of people will say, yeah, but Jesus didn't say it. Well, actually, Jesus did indirectly comment on homosexuality because he said repeatedly, man, he quotes Genesis 2 and says God created them male and female, and through the union of their flesh they are one. So he lays out his theology of marriage, and he does not include homosexual acts as part of it. The other thing to remember about this whole discussion is always focus on the fact that we're discussing the act. Homosexual acts are sinful. We're not talking about temptations, attractions. We're talking about specifically the act of one man having sex with another man or one woman having sex with another woman. That is the act that is specifically described and listed as sinful in those three New Testament passages. Again, it's very much about defining your terms. And so I do believe there are discussions to be had about temptation, homosexual attraction. When does it cross the line between being sinful and not sinful? But, again, those are things that you don't even have to get into when you're just talking about this issue on the surface. We're just talking about the act. Is it sinful or is it not? The Bible clearly says that it is sinful. Therefore, you cannot make an argument that a Christian can be practicing that act regularly and have it not be them living in sin, them living a sinful lifestyle.
The safe answer for why we don't have to follow a lot of the laws is God made it come with us.
Well, yeah, I know. I know
So
that,
if he
but-
says like, well, it's in here, just stop it all with that sentence and then continue on.
Well, then the person might want to say, well, if God made a new covenant, why are we following things from the old covenant?
Yeah, where do you
Well, and then
learn
we
to
don't have
to distinguish what still applies to us and what doesn't?
By reading the whole Bible. And that sounds like a joke. I don't mean it as a joke. Read the whole story. Like when you're reading a book, and if you're reading, say, a history book on the U.S. history, and let's say we're reading, and we see that they come up with the Articles of Confederation, and we read the Articles of Confederation. We're like, these are looks like a pretty good list of rules, and then we stop reading. Are we as Americans supposed to live under the law of the Articles of Confederation? No. Why not? What happened 15 years after the Articles of Confederation?
They failed miserably.
They failed miserably. They reconvened the Congress, and they drafted
The Magna Carta?
the U.S. Constitution. They drafted the U.S.
I'm
Constitution.
very bad with history.
Magna Carta was in England.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so you have to keep reading the story. And once you keep reading the
But does
historical
that mean
story...
that none of the things in the Article of Confederation show up in the Constitution? No.
Exactly. So there are parts of the Articles of Confederation that are still good and that we should be following. Reason, because they're repeated in the Constitution. That is the binding law of the land. So it's the exact same thing with reading the Bible. You're reading a book of history and you say, what if this applies to me? Well, you finish reading the whole story and then you think to yourself, what if this applies to me? Just like you finish reading the whole book of American history and you say, does the Constitution still apply to me? Well, we haven't reconvened Congress. They haven't done away with the Constitution. They have made amendments to it. And so we keep ourselves in line with the most up-to-date version of the law of the land.
However, we're still in school, so really.
Exact same thing, though. You have to read the whole story. It starts in Genesis 1 and it ends in Revelation. And we are currently living in between the book of Jude and the book of Revelation. So everything that still applies up to the end of the book of Jude applies to us. And everything that doesn't still apply once you get there doesn't. But how do you know? By reading it. And there's not really any way around it. Or we're talking to people who have read it and then asking, does this apply? They're like, no. Look, right here, doesn't apply anymore. Okay, cool. History changed.
Would it be correct to say that most of that is talked about in the New Testament?
Yeah.
Like, you're not missing, if you read just the New Testament, you're not missing any big things. Like, not, like, excluding like the references. Like, if he references something, that's considered included in the New Testament.
Yes, the problem you're going to run into is many places in the New Testament where they literally summarize the whole Bible. You're like, well, if he's saying that all of that applies and somehow we have to figure out how to, I'm going to have to read it.
Okay.
Generally speaking, the I don't want to make that statement. This is something that could be misconstrued as heretical, so I'm not even 50% sure of what I'm about to say. Disclaimer, okay? If you have to pick a couple books of the Old Testament that you put more weight on, I would say Genesis is the number one. You can't get on the right trail if you don't know where the trail starts. So Genesis is telling us, this whole book is a story, and you have to start at the beginning of the story. And then beyond that, reading particularly the prophets, because that's the part that is still applying to us. Right? The prophets are largely talking about things that are yet future for us. So it's important for us to know them so that we know when that stuff happens. Right? The rest of it is history, important history that a lot of this the New Testament you can't understand without knowing the history. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to find hardly anything that's directly applicable to you in the historical books because they're historical books. Mm-hmm. You have to read them like history. Genesis, on the other hand, is a historical book, but it's laying out the path of history. So you're getting you started down the trail so that you can better understand the New Testament. The vast majority of Paul's theology comes straight out of Genesis 1 through 6. Or 1 through 15, I should say. Abraham shows up a lot in Paul. And Paul wrote the majority of the New Testament books. So, did that track?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm always hesitant to say certain books are more important than others. Because I don't want you hearing the message, okay, so I don't need to worry about the others. No, the others are important too.
Just less relevant to us living our daily lives.
Correct. And that's something I'm hoping you're coming away with. Something I'm really fighting a battle with lots of my friends in seminary and profs right now. You get out your Bibles. I'm going to pull up Genesis through the end of Acts. That's that much of the Bible. These are the New Testament epistles and Revelation. Okay? Genesis through the book of Acts does not apply to you. Okay? And what I mean is, the things that it says it's doing, or the things that are happening, are not about you. You're not in there. They're not written for you to learn how to live a better life, or they're written for the primary purpose of you recognizing and believing in the Messiah. That is what this story is about. And all of this is so that when you get to, all of the Old Testament is so that when you get to the Gospels, you're going, he's here. Right? all of these little tick, 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 tick. He is doing everything that they said the Messiah is going to do. As you're just marching through the story and the prophets, and you're saying, yeah, this is the Messiah. And the Jews aren't getting it. And you're reading the Gospels, still don't apply to you. And you're going, the Jews aren't getting it. They don't realize this is the guy. He's here. The Messiah has showed up. They should be believing in him, and they're not. Why aren't they believing in him? Why aren't the... And then you get to Acts, and you go, he's our Messiah too? We get to be part of this. You see the stuff that was promised to the Jews by believing in the Messiah, and we get to partake in those promises by grace. We don't have to become Jews. That's what half of the book of Acts is about. Gentiles don't have to become Jews to believe in the Messiah, to be Christians. That's amazing. That's the application. Believe in the Messiah and you will have eternal life. That's what the whole Old Testament is about. It doesn't apply to you in that it's not about you. It's there to tell you what to watch out for. Right? It's so that you react to the people and the things that are happening in the appropriate way. Just like when you read any kind of story where the characters are acting the right way or the wrong way, and you say, oh, I need to act the right way. What's the moral of this story? The moral of this story is believe the Messiah, and you will have eternal life.
And that's more answering the question about the New Testament that I had. That was more what I meant.
Yeah, so the New Testament is all about two things. Commenting on the fact that the Jews didn't get it and what they're going to do about it, and telling this new body of Jews and Gentiles how to get along until the Messiah returns. So there's a whole lot of very directly applicable things in the epistles, because we're represented in the audience, right? He's writing to a group of Jews and Gentiles, saying, here's how you get along, here's how you live until the Messiah shows up. So we, as the Gentile readers, say, oh, here's how I live until the Messiah shows up. Here's what I need to believe, here's what I need to do, here's what I should be doing if I believe in him. But again, this is one story, and it's really hard to take ourselves out of it. It's really hard to just read this as a book. And it's just a book. And this is where I'm getting, part of this is just me bleeding through the struggles I'm having in seminaries, trying to get my friends to demythologize the Bible. This is not some super secret spiritual thing where you read it and you hear a little voice whispering, this is how you're supposed to apply this in your life, and this is, now you have the secrets to happiness and health.
It's a history book.
It's a history book. It's a incredible history. It's a story. That's the word. It's a story. The same way that you read, and I don't know what books you guys are reading nowadays. I used to always go to Harry Potter. Same way you read Harry Potter, and you say, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and then if Harry Potter were true, what would you do about it? That's how you read the Bible. You read the story, you say, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, this is how the story is progressing along, but this is true, so what do you do about it? Answer, believe the Messiah. That's the short answer. And ultimately, like the goals that we came up with last time, just marvel at the complexity and wonder and glory and majesty of this God who created and redeems and time again forgives. We learn about who God is throughout this story. He's creator, yes. That he says he's long-suffering. How long-suffering? Oh, let me tell you how long-suffering. You read this thing? You see how long he suffered with these people? These people? And you think he doesn't have time for you? No, he's going to put up with all kinds of crap you throw at him. Have you seen the kinds of crap he's put up with? These are people who literally just walked through water that he parted in front of them, and then they turn around and say, we're hungry. We don't like the food you gave us. Give us something better. And he stuck with them. He disciplined them through that, but he stuck with them. This is who our God is. He is long-suffering. He is merciful. These are the things that you draw out of this story. Getting on a tangent. You see, this we tend to oversimplify and then mythologize and deify this book as if this book is somehow God himself. It is not God himself. It is his word. It is true. But if you're worshiping the book, you're worshiping the wrong thing. And if you're looking to the book to give you life, you are going to be sadly mistaken. You're supposed to be looking at the one the book points to. That's almost exactly what Jesus said. I'm reminded of it's in Luke. I'll just Google it. That'll be faster. Oh, it's in John. John 5. This, I think, is very similar to what is happening, particularly in our conservative Bible church Christian culture circles. The Jews are there. They're supposed to be looking to the Messiah, and instead, they're looking to follow the law to earn salvation. And Jesus says to the Pharisees, I'll start in verse 37 so you get, or 36. Let's just go back to 30. John 5, verse 30, if you want to read along. I can do nothing on my own. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, right after they've questioned his authority. And he started to claim that he is equal to God. And they're like, is this guy claiming that he's equal to God? What kind of brass pair does he have? I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. If I alone bear witness about myself, my testimony is not true. There is another who bears witness about me. I know that the testimony that he bears about me is true. You sent to John, and he has borne witness to the truth, John the Baptist. Not that the testimony that I received is from man, but I say these things that you may be saved. He was a burning and shining lamp, and you were willing to rejoice for a while in his life, but the testimony that I have is greater than that of John. For the works that the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works that I'm doing, bear witness about me, that the Father has sent me. And the Father who sent me has made himself borne witness about me. His voice you have never heard. His form you have never seen. And you do not have his word abiding in you, for you do not believe the one whom he has sent me. You search the scriptures because you think in them that you have eternal life. And it is they that bear witness about me. Yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life. I think that is so true of our churches today. People are searching the scriptures because they think in them they have life, and they do not recognize that it is about Christ that they testify. You're not supposed to come to the Bible for your faith. You're supposed to come to Jesus for your faith. And the Bible testifies of him. The Bible is extremely important. It is the grounding anchor by which our faith is directly pointed towards him. But it is not the object of your faith. And we get in this mode where we try to read the Bible in this devotional way where we can draw truths out so that we can have a better life. And that's not what the Bible's about. It's about the Messiah. Jesus says it over and over and over again. You search the scriptures because you think he says it there. He took the disciples aside and showed them how all of the Old Testament and the prophets testified of him. This whole thing's about Jesus.
It doesn't mean it can't tell you how to live a better life, though, right?
Absolutely, it can. But so can other books. And that's where I'm sorting through this myself. It's like, well, what's wrong with drawing out good applicational truths from the Bible? Like when we see Jacob obeys and it works out well for him, what's wrong with preaching that sermon? The problem is that's not why that book was written. There are plenty of other books that you can read and see how somebody does a good thing and it works out well. So what makes this book different? What does this book do that those books don't? What this book does that those books don't is point to the Messiah.
So So the problem with trying to find application in the Bible is not that it's not there, is that you might try to find it where it wasn't meant to be.
Exactly. You might miss the point. There's a particular point this book is making. And we've by and large missed the point.
I have another completely different question.
Yeah. So I got off on my quit reading the Bible rant, or quit reading the Bible the wrong way rant.
Spirits, exorcisms, that kind of stuff.
Interesting question.
How does that work?
I don't know a whole lot. I know. So let's think with me. What facts do we know from the scriptures about demons, spirits, possessions, that sort of thing?
They're there?
They did. So let's be very specific. They did occur. Demonic possessions definitely did occur during the time of Jesus. Because we see examples where Jesus says a demon is possessed and he casts them out.
Through the power of God, they are cast out.
Through the power of God, they are cast out, and through the power of not God, they are cast out. We see a couple of examples of where someone who is operating not under God's authority still casts out demons. And it seems to be well known that someone who is not operating by the power of God, but by the power of the devil, could have cast out certain demons based on what they say. This is all that time, that place. There were discerning facts, but it's good. Leah?
Slightly related. Well, it is related. Are there any like examples in the Bible of like a demon like having a physical form, or just them possessing other?
Good question. Let's hold that one
Okay.
up here. Remind me to come back to it if I forget. What else do we know? What about, think Old Testament times, pre the Messiah show, pre New Testament, demonic possessions. This is why you need to know the Bible. You need to know the story.
I know there was one where, like didn't one fall through the... Am I thinking of...
Well, there's Egypt.
Is that the one Jesus did?
Where they were trying to match what Moses was doing.
All right, so yeah, we got the sorcerers in Egypt who are pretty well matching what Moses is doing. His are coming out a little bit on top, but
so there is power in
some sort of
demons.
sorcery, witchcraft that was, again, be very specific. We know that it was that way at that time. You've got the witch of Endor. When Samuel dies, Saul's about to go into battle, the battle that kills him, and he wants to hear from the prophet Samuel, so he goes to a witch who summons Samuel from the grave, and Samuel shows up and says, you should not have done this. So he seems to appear as some sort of a ghost or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Questions of, okay, so this is a story, was this actually Samuel? Was this some deceiving spirit appearing in the form of Samuel and giving him bad advice? Saul does go off to die after that. So. But that thing happened. Put it there. We have specifically a couple of mentions, like in 1 Samuel 15, I think it is. No, it's after that. 16. Chapter 16, verse 14. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. That's a verse that causes a lot of people problems. An evil spirit from the Lord. Clearly there is a demonic realm that exists. We've got Daniel, when the angel shows up and says, I was contending with the prince of some of the... There's an angelic war going on that we are unaware of. A couple of references in Daniel that do that. All that to say, these are the facts that we got. So, things that I can deduce for certain. Demons do exist, or at the very least have existed in the past. I would say, based on Revelation, we can say categorically they do still exist, since they have and they will. Possessions, as they occur today, I would say there's nothing that specifically says that they can't happen today. There's nothing that would indicate in the New Testament says that they've they came to an end when Christ ascended. In fact, we specifically see a few in the early church in Acts, where Peter casts out a demonically possessed girl. How do they do this? They do this by the power of faith, authority vested in them by Jesus. We look at church history. So are there examples in early church history of the demonic powers continuing?
Quick question.
Yeah.
You said authority, like, in them through power of Jesus. Does that mean that anybody who believes?
It's a good question. So when Jesus is about to ascend in Matthew 28, and he says, "All authority has been given to me." "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and behold, I am with you till the end of the age." And then in Acts he says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Is he talking to all believers throughout history, or is he talking to those 12? I think he's talking to those 12. I'd say that Acts, a lot of the things that the disciples and apostles did in the book of Acts, we should not expect to do. Because Jesus was talking to them, not to us. There's a lot of things in the epistles where Paul says, "We did these things when we were among you," to validate the fact that we are of the truth. He makes that argument a couple times in Ephesians and in Romans and in 1 Corinthians. When he says "we," he's talking about the apostles. We were given particular authority to establish the church, and you should not. And the subtext is, you should not expect to have that authority. You should just believe in our authority. So, to answer your question, no, I don't think that we should expect to have that authority and that power necessarily. I'm open to it, though. I haven't had any experiences with the demonic realm myself, so here's all of that to say. So that's how I just walked you through my process of how do I think through something. Look at the Bible, think of all the examples. There might be more that would clarify our view a little bit, but all that adds up to, for me, the possibility that they exist and that they do still act, demonic possessions and things like that. It is by the power of God that they are controlled. Nothing happens without God's allowing it or controlling it to occur. They are always subject. Whenever we see them, if God shows up and gives some sort of command, they obey it. So they're under his authority. And we, being adopted as sons in Christ, have that authority. And that I would say we would have that protection, put it that way. So I conclude from a systematic point of view, Christians cannot be subject to the removal of our will via demonic means because we are protected by the blood of Christ. But I do think that they can still exist and possess those outside of the church, outside of those who have been given a new nature, put it that way.
So, like, in Catholicism, there's a lot of that whole stuff.
Yeah.
I guess that's more prevalent and less developed. Oh, not, you know what I mean.
Yeah, third world church. It's
Yes.
very common.
How does... So there are claims that, demons get cast out, and there is an obvious change from what they were acting like to what they are now acting like. Is that because there was a demon and is no longer in them? Like, did they have the power to...
I certainly think it's possible. I certainly think that demonic activity, particularly in third world church in Africa and parts of Southeast Asia, that demonic activity is more prevalent there because it is more effective there, and that the means of combating them via the Holy Spirit on the part of Christians is valid. I definitely judge it on a case-by-case basis. I'm not willing to say everyone who claims to have been possessed and set free from a demon has, but I'm not willing to disbelieve them outright either. Let's hear the evidence. That's a careful balance. Again, thinking just systematically about this, I would think if that's true, why would I say it's less common in the States? Yeah, and I would say it's less effective here. We tend to be more skeptical and disbelieve those things more readily, and so Satan knows that he has more effective ways of thwarting the church, such as getting people to believe that in the scriptures they have life, deadening people's faith instead of outright attacks via demonic influence. That would be my thinking through it. If putting myself in the place of Satan, it'd be much more effective on his part to just make a whole bunch of nice behaving quote-unquote Christians who don't really believe the Messiah but don't ever have any strong demonic influences that push them towards the Messiah either. As C.S. Lewis put it, the safest road to hell is the gradual one without any signposts or warnings to turn back. That'd be my assessment of it. Got time for a couple more. What do you think?
What about my question before?
Question before.
Yeah, the
Repeat it for me.
about if demons have like any mention of physical form.
Mention of physical form for demons. I know that there's a mention of physical form for angels. We can all think of examples of that. Gabriel appearing, the three men coming to Abraham in the Old Testament. Two of them being described as angels. And so since demons are angels who have rebelled, I would say it seems to make sense that demons could take physical form to communicate messages from their master, Satan, the enemy. So, could demons take physical form? I certainly think they could. I don't know of any examples off the top of my head in the Bible where a rebellious angel took physical form. Does that answer your question? That doesn't mean they're not in there. It just might mean that I can't think of them.
Did they all rebel at the same time?
Another good question. Were there multiple phases of angelic rebellion? When did the angels fall and how did they fall?
When did they stop falling?
When did they stop falling? There is a mention somewhere, thinking back to my angelology class, that says something about angels being their will to rebel being removed from them. I think it's in Peter. That's a vague one though.
Their will to rebel?
Yeah.
I didn't think they had a will to
I didn't think
begin
me either.
Well,
they would have had to.
yeah, they must have had some sort of will to rebel if they did rebel.
The first one mentions Lucifer.
Wait a second. So if it says then that doesn't make any sense.
Always look for biblical reference and then go look at the biblical reference.
If their will was to rebel was removed, does that mean the angels that were not rebellious, those wills were removed as well?
This is very Catholic doctrine. Sorry, what was your question? That you just said?
I was saying, so when the angels rebelled, God removed the will of the angels that were still there, right?
Scroll up just a little bit. Peter.
Where? Okay, never mind.
I just saw Peter.
God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into the chains of darkness, but to be reserved for judgment.
Oh, so he's going to judge the angels as well.
Yeah.
Rebel.
Yeah, he's definitely going to judge the angels. That's clear from Revelation 20. The beast and his false prophet are cast in the lake of fire, and then the angels who followed him are cast in after that.
The lake of fire is just the lake of fire. It's not a judgment thing, or it is a judgment thing?
Hell.
Okay.
How we would commonly say it today. Hell is not like Satan's domain where he rules and reigns. That's not a Christian view of hell. Hell is a place where everyone gets tortured, including Satan. Hell is a place where God reigns. His wrath is justly poured out on all who are there. As for when did the angels fall, I would say it was probably before creation. That'd be my guess. Other possibility would be, I say creation, before the first day of creation. I tend to lean towards gap theory explanations of that.
So is that war thing real? Does that have to do with the fall or no?
War thing. The idea of a constant angelic war going on.
Well, not constant, but you mentioned a war between the angels and.
I think there is one going on right now. Excuse me.
It's continuous.
Yeah.
As long as demons are there, they're fighting.
I think one of the clearest places you can see this is Daniel. There's another mention in Numbers where someone is given the vision.
Oh, you're right. So what are they fighting for? How do they know what they're fighting for? If they don't have the will to fight.
If you go to Daniel 10, Daniel's receiving this vision from a man who appears to him, an angel, I would say.
Not yet. Yeah, I texted you.
First day you understand, humble yourself and bring your God, king and praise your stood. So there's this angel who appears to
After you
Daniel,
called me the first time and I hung up.
and he said to me, "O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the word that I speak to you. Stand upright, for now I have been being sent to you." And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. He said to me, "Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humble yourself before God, your words you have been heard. I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes," we've already established in this story Michael is an angel, so here we're saying prince means angel. So the angel of the kingdom of Persia withstood me for 21 days, but Michael, the chief angel, came to help me, for I was left there with the king of Persia, and came to make you understand what is happening to your people in the latter days of this vision. So this angel is like, yeah, sorry I couldn't get here in time. I was battling this other angel. Michael came and helped me out so I could make it here to give you this message.
That's kind of cool.
Okay, so that's happening. You get Revelation, where there's a really clear description of the war going on in heaven. Michael and his angels are battling Lucifer. Lucifer, quote unquote, and his angels. The dragon is how it's described there.
So because in the previous example, he said he was also battling a prince. He didn't, it was the same sort of title. I guess that meant that was an angel that turned against.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say that I think it's very reasonable theology to say that many of the world leaders, particularly those who are evil in an objective sense, are demonically motivated, if not demonically possessed. Because of what we see in all of these prophets where angels show up and talk about world leaders at the time who they're warring against, and God is bringing about his will through his own angels warring against them. Again, this is why when you start thinking through all these things and we start trying to apply our own filters onto them, this is why I've told you guys before, the number one thing I came out of my angelology class with about angels was we really don't know that much about angels. We get glimpses of stuff that happens in the story, but when we try to systematize it, it doesn't make sense to us. Because
they do things.
Yeah. They're there and they do things. I think that's a good way to go about it. So if you encounter one, fall back on the power of the Lord who saves you. Because they're more powerful than us. So.
But we can't look upon them, right?
Angels, yeah.
Can't look upon the face of God.
God's too much.
Wasn't there?
With angels.
I guess when there was a thing in the.
Yeah.
Yeah, still on the angels thing. So I know, I feel like we've probably talked about this before, but, and I've kind of been zoning out because my dad's just being annoying, but anyway.
We love him.
Yeah. So my grandma believes that she has a guardian angel, and like, how, is there any like
How reasonable is that?
backing for that?
Uh,
Like having, I guess she has it, says it, or sorry,
Like
she
she has a
phrases it as
specific
if she has her own personal
Oh.
guardian angel.
that's a pretty common theology, particularly in Catholic circles.
Yeah.
Oh, like all the little saints.
No,
Yeah.
like guardian angels that they
That's
take
Yeah, I mean,
things
like
to
Saint
because
Peter,
God's
like you
too
pray to
busy.
the.
Yeah, it's weird.
Let's
I was
go
talking
with.
to Ashley about that.
Is she Catholic?
Yeah.
Well,
But-
Suzanne's Catholic too. I mean, I guess not really. I don't know,
Well, I mean, I've
I know
talked with
the
her
other-
enough that I'm pretty confident, like, she knows how to get to heaven. But
Yeah.
she still prays to saints and stuff. You know, they have like little prayers that they have and stuff.
Like mass, or what do you mean? Like the
No, like if they lost something, they like pray to a saint and it'll help them find it because they still have like power within heaven. That I think is a bit ridiculous. But I listened to her talk about it, and it was interesting.
So you did a quick search on the word
Like,
angelos,
instead of
angel,
praying to
in the New
Jesus
Testament.
when you want something. you can pray
This
to
is a
Mary.
good way when
This
you're
is
trying to
proof
think of a
Jesus.
theology on a
Because
particular
it's just
subject. This is what a concordance is used for, listing all of the verses that this particular word appears in. And so angelos, you'll notice, so the highlighted word is what in the Greek is angelos, messenger or angel. And you'll notice it's translated a couple different ways. So he angelosed the people to sit down. Okay, there he means told, messaged to them. Reported angel, angel. So you also notice particular stories. Luke 1. What's going on in Luke 1?
I'm assuming Mary.
Good guess is before that. Oh, I guess it is. Mary's also in Luke 1. So it's the angel appearing to Zechariah first, and then the angel appearing to Mary, and you're reading these two. So a lot of the appearance of the word angel in Luke 1. That makes sense. I generally go, when I'm trying to think through systematic theology on a subject, like, does this ever happen? Search a couple of words that you know will bring up relevant passages. Angel is a good one for this. And then go start with the epistles. And I say, are there any clear statements of fact in the epistles? They're like devoid of context. It's just like, we know that the angels do not marry in heaven. Okay, angels don't marry in heaven. Put that one on the list of things I know about angels. For sure, he does not give help to angels, but he gives help to the descendants of Adam. I just clicked on it. But you have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriad of angels. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it.
How does that work?
What's he talking about? Well, then, when you find those things, you go and you read the passage in context, and you make sure that what it's saying is what you understand it to be saying. And let's see if we can find it. First and Second Peter are particular ones that angelology gets shaken up by. 2 Peter 2:11. Let's go read 2 Peter 2. There's two occurrences of the word angel there. This is one that will throw a lot of people into a tizzy. Let's start in the beginning of chapter 2. So what's 2 Peter about? Anybody?
the rise of the false prophets.
Pretty, actually, this heading is pretty good one. Yeah. 2 Peter is all about how to recognize and why you should reject a false teacher when he comes to you in the church. 2 Peter and Jude are very similar in that way. So, chapter 2. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will also be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. Many will follow their sensuality, and because of them the way of the truth will be maligned. And in their greed they will exploit you with false words. Their judgment from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, and if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter, and if he rescued Lot, righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, for by what he saw and heard, the righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who are indulging the flesh in its corrupt desires and despise authority. Daring self-willed, they do not tremble when they revile angelic majesties. Notice, it's not highlighted there. Angelic majesties doesn't use the word angel. It This is the translators having a little bit of license with their translation. What is it? Whereas, verse 11, whereas angels who are greater in might and power do not bring a reviling judgment against them before the Lord. What does this mean? First of all, ask yourself, what point is Peter making? What did he start? He gave you a whole bunch of illustrations, right? Talked about
The
angels
Lord
who are
knows how to rescue the godly from temptation.
There you
and
go.
the unrighteous.
That's the point. That's the point he's making. So whatever else you draw from this, make sure that you recognize the point he's making is that God rescues from temptation and from destruction those who are of faith, those who are righteous. But there are tangential things that we can... Okay, these are statements he makes about angels. Did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment. So evidently, God cast certain angels into a pit of darkness, waiting for some sort of destruction.
And those certain angels were probably the angels that rebelled and fell.
Yeah.
Or not fell, but yeah.
They sinned. So, angels can sin.
But that was the sin? That was the only sin they committed? Or does it not explain it?
So lots of people will take this and they'll go over to Genesis 6 and say, look, the sons of God came and slept with the daughters of men. And they'll say, sons of God, those are the angels there. And that's why Peter then talks about Noah. Problem with that is that he doesn't actually mention the angels from Genesis 6. He mentions certain angels who sinned, and in his list of illustrations of people who were rescued, he mentions angels who were not spared judgment, Noah who was spared judgment, Lot who was spared judgment,
Not his wife.
but not his wife. So this is just examples of God exercising his authority to judge, not necessarily saying the angels I'm mentioning are the ones from chapter 6, because those were angels.
He's just giving examples to prove his point on
Yes, exactly.
what the yeah.
But angels who are greater in might and power do not bring a reviling judgment against them before the Lord. This would be where some people get the idea, okay, so angels can't sin anymore. Right? They did sin, he locked them up, and now angels who are greater in might and power do not bring a reviling judgment against them before the Lord. As in, they can't incur judgment now. They've had their will taken away from them. And they quote 2 Peter 2:11. I think there's some merit to that. I just don't care that much. It's like, I'm going to let the angels do their thing. I'm going to believe in Jesus.
So if you go to verse 4,
Yeah.
It says, those, when they sinned, and then he cast them into hell.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that it has already been done? So all the angels that have sinned are already in hell? Or is it saying like that that's what will have happened, but it hasn't yet?
That's okay.
Let's see.
Could be either way, right?
Let's serious.
Because of the way it starts, for if God did not spare the angels.
Yeah.
Well, then that kind of alludes to it already happening.
Yeah, because if it's all true past tense, then verse 11 would make more sense. But then you have to take into account, like, when did he do it?
These are all aorists. If you think back to your Greek days, simple past tense, which means probably he did do this with these angels, but evidence would say he's done that. Yeah, you could probably make an argument that he did this during the church time and Peter is revealing it. I wouldn't go that way. Generally, I would say he's probably talking about something that God did in a long time ago past, and there are specific angels who have been imprisoned.
That's what I'm inclined to agree with. But then in your example where that one angel was fighting the other angel,
Yeah.
that angel would have had to sin to be fighting an angel that was of God.
Well, he doesn't say all of the angels who sinned.
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there might have been a large group who rebelled and sinned, and then a smaller group who sinned in a particular way for which they were cast into hell and bound, awaiting further judgment.
Okay.
Of the larger group who rebelled and followed Satan are still at large.
And still have their will.
Yeah. Or their will to rebel. Their will is now subject to Satan. I would
So
say.
some sins just mean that they're against God and God's angels fight them, and some sins earn them hell.
Yeah.
So they have a completely different sin system than
Yeah.
we do.
They don't understand grace. That's another one where there's a verse somewhere that says angels incline to.
Angels weren't saved.
Mhm. They don't have any redemption. Once they mess up,
That's wrong.
This is sin.
Well, but it isn't though, because he created us knowing we would sin for the fact that we would be saved. But he created them.
He didn't.
That doesn't make sense. Why did he create them? What's the point of creating them?
First Peter.
It's just different. God does so many things.
Yeah, that's one of those things you're just not gonna worry
I mean,
about.
if I was an angel, I think that's enough incentive to.
It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves but you in these things which now have been announced to you through those who preach the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things into which angels long to look.
What? Repeat that?
This 1 Peter 1:12. Let's start back a couple verses to get the context. He's talking about the gospel. He's introducing and talking about the gospel. As to this salvation, the prophets who prophesied of the grace that would come to you made careful searches and inquiries, seeking to know what person or time the Spirit of Christ within them was indicating as he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the glory to follow. I.e., the prophets were looking for the Messiah. People who say that the prophets didn't know that the Messiah was coming are idiots. Sorry. I'm talking to people who legitimately believe that the writers of the Old Testament weren't really on the lookout for the Messiah. It's like Peter specifically says exactly that right here. Sorry. It's people who put on this air of being very, very logical and trying and having a reasonable faith, and they couldn't have known what was coming. Okay.
But they did.
They did.
But they say the Messiah will do this. So that means the Messiah has to be.
But they didn't really understand it. They were just speaking the mysteries of God and just.
So just if God gives you words
No,
to say.
they specifically were looking. They prophesied of the grace that would come and made careful searches and inquiries, seeking to know what person and time the Messiah would occur. Are you reading this book? It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves, but you in these things, which now have been announced to you through those who preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. Things into which angels long to look. So what are the things?
The grace that would come.
Yeah, salvation by means of the grace. These are the things into which angels long to look. They do not understand how this grace could be preached to these who are dispersed and grafted into Israel. These things angels long to look, as in many would conclude from this, and I think I agree. Angels don't get grace. They have a whole different, like you were saying, whole different sin system.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about Supernatural. How weird that show. Weird how that
Okay,
the structure of that show, as far as the biblical references and the biblical application, or I wouldn't say application, but whatever goes,
Illusions.
is so
Wrong.
opposite
Yeah.
of the actual Bible. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I mean, not surprising.
I still like it.
Right.
We're way over time. I'm still cool to hang out, but if anybody has to go. So.
Somebody once mentioned to me, I think it was, they were like, when, in the New Testament, when Jesus was giving Peter a chance to redeem himself, with "Do you love me?" they said that he replied with like, the Hebrew.
The two different Greek words there.
It meant like as a general love. I was like, that doesn't sound right.
So this is one where I disagree with my Greek professors, actually. So take that for what it's worth. But it's John 21. You know the story, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Jesus has already been resurrected, but has only appeared to the disciples here and there. They're out fishing still, and Jesus appears on the beach, tells them, cast your nets. Their nets are full. Peter says, it's Jesus. Gets out, runs to the shore, and they're having breakfast. Peter says, it is the Lord. So Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord. He put his outer garment on, threw himself into the sea, and the other disciples came, a little boat, not far from the land, dragging a net full of fish, and they're sitting there eating breakfast. Jesus said to them, come, let us have breakfast.
Peter was so inefficient.
This is now the third time that Jesus was... This is the third time Jesus was manifest to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Lots of debate over what are the these. Are they the other disciples or are they the fish? I think it's the other disciples. But,
Oh, yeah.
I don't care. Like, sure, either one. He's asking him, do you love me? Now the word for love, these two Greek words for love. Agape and philos. We in our Christian-y theological circles will like to say agape is the unconditional God-like love. Philos is like the friendship love.
Is that incorrect?
It's not incorrect. It's too simplistic.
Okay.
There has to be some sort of a difference, a small difference between the two words. They're not entirely the same meaning, otherwise you'd have the same word. But throughout the whole book of John, we see Jesus talking about how he philoses the disciples and how they agape him, and they're used fairly interchangeably throughout the whole book. And this is what my Greek professors will say. Look, you have to demonstrate that John is using these two words in some sort of a distinct manner. Otherwise, they're synonyms, and he's using them as synonyms. But it's the progression of the use of the words that I find interesting. So he says, John, do you love me more than these? And he says, love, agape. Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know that I philos you. Phileo. I'm using the nouns right now, but they're verbs. You know that I philos you. He said, 10 my lambs. He said to him a second time, Jesus says, so the first time, Jesus says, tell me the Greek word for it.
Is it agape?
Agape, and Peter responds, you know that I philos. Second time, Jesus says, do you agape me? Peter responds, you know that I philos you. Third time, Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you philos me? So the third time, Jesus asks a question, the same question with different words. He says,
Bye, Leon.
Bye.
He says, do you agape me? Peter says, I philos you. Do you agape me? Peter says, I philos you. The third time he says, Peter, do you philos me? And Peter responds, Lord, you know all things. You know that I philos you. I read that. My Greek professors say the words are synonymous. John's not making any kind of a deeper point by changing the words because they mean the exact same thing. I read that and go, if this is the conversation, put in some other set of synonyms. Let's stop trying to make this big distinction between philos and agape. Let's say I say to you, do you like tomato soup? You go, I really love vegetable-based soups. Do you like tomato soup? I really love vegetable soups. Do you like vegetable soups? Yeah, I love vegetable soups. Okay. You're making some kind of a point by responding with different words. Okay? The fact that you are not responding like with the exact same word, the way you're answering is communicating something. And I'm not necessarily saying that there is this strong distinction. I'm saying there's some distinction. And the fact that Jesus changes the third time seems to me support for that. He says he meets Peter on his terms. He starts using his words. So I think it's possible that in this passage alone, just because we're using these two words in the immediate context the way that they're being used in conversation, right? You can make a case that there's a distinction between the meanings. For that, just because of that reason. Like if somebody asks you, "Do you like this?" and they say, I don't not like it. They're saying the same thing, but they're not saying the same thing, right? They're changing the words for some reason.
I don't like it.
So I think the reason Peter's saying that is because he sees a difference between agape and philos, and he does not think that his own actions measure up to the level of agape.
That is deep.
He denied Jesus 3 times, and this is the first time he's spoken with Jesus one-on-one since he's done that. And so he's saying, Lord, you know all things. You know that I can't say that I love you the way you love me. I think there's merit to that interpretation. Again, my Greek professors would say there's not, and I disagree with them.
I was going to say that it seemed kind of like, I don't know, this is my take on it. Like, he didn't feel like he's capable of the love that Jesus is showing him.
Yeah. And I would say that there's some merit to that interpretation. There are people who I very much respect and generally agree on almost everything else who will say, no, there's no distinction there.
Fortunately, that's a very
yeah, it's a small thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's actually one of my favorite passages to teach.
This is a good passage.
Where are you going to go? Any thoughts on what we want to do next week? Are there specific questions that I might be able to prepare something ahead of time instead of answering on the fly?
I'm okay with dispensationalism.
I would love to remember what that is.
and not just be awakened to it every single time you do it.
I'll take another stab at prepping a good dispensationalism lesson then. We'll probably do, I'll try and make it 2 weeks and keep it to just 2 weeks.
How long was it last time?
Last time I tried to teach it, it took 3 weeks. And I would like to change how I present it, so hopefully it gets shorter, not longer. You were here when I was explaining why we didn't do it last week, so I'll do my best.